I see a rabbit. I see a duck. In his phenomenology essay, David Lewin argues that both of these statements are valid in describing what I see in the famous illusion pictured here, but that the statement, I see a rabbit and a duck, is invalid. This is due to the fact, Lewin contends, that nobody actually sees both a rabbit and a duck at the same time, or in the same phenomenological place. Rather, what does occur for most of us while perceiving this image is a switching effect, a flipping back and forth between two percepts that are presented to our consciousness as equally valid. One moment we see a rabbit, the next we see a duck. This illusion exemplifies the phenomenon of multistability. Simply put, a multistable percept occurs when a stimulus invites multiple plausible interpretations that are mutually incompatible. Because the internal organizations are inconsistent, an observer will generally experience both perceptions alternately. Other famous multistable images include the Necker cube, a three-dimensional object that can be viewed as facing one of two directions, and Rubens' vase, an image that encourages Gestalt figure ground reversal, in which different components of the image present themselves as either the foreground or background, a white vase or two faces silhouetted in black. Lewin continues his discussion of the rabbit duck by suggesting that it is entirely possible for us to descriptively capture both of the object's organizations in one phenomenological place. But to do so, we would need to invent a new word, Dubbit. However, if I change my language in this way, claiming that I see a dubbit, or perhaps a ruck, I alter the terms of my engagement with the object. I am describing something qualitatively different than the experience of appreciating both the rabbit tendencies and duck suggestions of the original image. For Lewin, the ambiguities of the situation provide the questions worth asking. If I sidestep ambiguity by changing the rules, I risk missing what makes the image special. A similar conceptual sidestep has occurred in the cognitive and theoretical literature surrounding the perception of polytonal music. Several empirical studies have investigated whether listeners can perceive multiple tonal centers simultaneously. In 1986, Krumhansel and Schmuckler led a series of experiments on the Petrushka chord using Krumhansel's probe tone method, in which a participant hears a tone following a musical stimulus, then rates that tone according to its goodness of fit with the preceding music. In attempting to determine to what extent listeners could perceptually segregate the C major and F-sharp major diatonic regions suggested by Stravinsky's chord, Krumhansel and Schmuckler conducted a series of dichotic listening tests, concluding that the two tonal hierarchies, although both apparently operative, are not perceptually separate. Instead, it appears that the passage gives rise to a complex fusion of two keys that cannot be separated. In 1992, Thompson and Moore conducted similar experiments using fully polytonal phrases from the literature. In line with the findings of Krumhansel and Schmuckler, Thompson and Moore obtained results suggesting mental instantiation of multiple keys, claiming that listeners can perceive more than one tonal organization or key at the same time, and that each key may be weighted according to its perceived importance in the music. Crucially, however, Thompson and Moore conceded that a related issue not addressed in the investigation is whether the two keys within a bitonal piece are perceptually separable. The experimental methodology itself might be considered the most significant drawback of these studies. That is, from a phenomenological perspective, the post-test probe tone paradigm, which may accurately establish a listener's retrospective awareness of multiple concurrent keys, does little to address the experience of perceiving conflicting tonal centers as polytonal music progresses in real time. A listener retroactively amalgamating two keys into one profile claims to have heard both at the same time. But this result moves the target. It places the locus of the perceptual problem at the end of the experience, suggesting a reconstructive act, rather than describing the experience itself. If the challenge of polytonal discriminability inheres in the ongoing present, the tempting vista provided by the experience's end risks our conflating one tonal rabbit and another tonal duck into a conveniently polytonal dubbit. The slippery, subtle experience of cognitively juggling two keys has been flattened into a new structure that changes the terms of our original engagement with the music. However, if we view such music through the lens of multistability, we can situate polytonal perception in the ongoing listening process, Thus I propose a model wherein I perceive a polytonal passage as a multistable stimulus in an unsteady state, with my hearing dynamically toggling between controlling tonics. The flexibility of this model allows for greater nuance in exploring the diversity of polytonal techniques, and it more satisfactorily addresses what it means to hear two keys simultaneously. By examining the ongoing mode of simultaneity in polytonal listening and investigating the phenomenological structures of this experience as it unfolds in time, the model shows how polytonal music is characterized by its disruption of our otherwise unified perception of tonality. In order to understand the role of such conscious unity in the multistable model, however, we must first turn to some concepts in the philosophy of time. We find as early as Kant the idea of the unity of consciousness across time being necessary for basic mental activity. He explores it in the first critique. Now it is obvious that if I draw a line in thought, or think of the time from one noon to the next, I must necessarily first grasp one representation after another in my thoughts. But if I were always to lose the preceding representations, the first parts of the line or the preceding parts of time, from my thoughts and not reproduce them when I proceed to the following ones, then no whole representation could ever arise. Kant's line of thinking is that, while consciousness itself cannot be temporally extended, retentions of past states of consciousness in the present are essential for a unified consciousness of and within time. This retentional view of time consciousness had its fullest exposition by Edmund Husserl, who developed diagrams for visualizing this experience from a phenomenological vantage point. In Husserl's diagram, objective time progresses on the horizontal axis, and retentions of past phases appear on the vertical axis, creating a contextualizing horizon of the past. When a percept, at P for example, is experienced in objective time, it sinks into the past, but doesn't fully exit consciousness, as it is subsequently presented alongside the next present percept, in this case at E. Let us hear one of Husserl's accounts of the wonder of time consciousness, as he puts it, and observe how the time diagram concretizes the experience of retention. Here Husserl describes hearing an approaching postilion's coach and horn. Quote, "If we focus reflectively on what is presently given in the actually present now with respect to the sound of the postilion's horn or the rumbling of the coach, and if we reflect on it just as it is given, then we note the trail of memory that extends the now point of the sound or of the rumbling. This reflection makes it evident that the immanent thing could not be given in its unity at all if the perceptual consciousness did not also encompass, along with the point of actually present sensation, the continuity of fading phases that pertain to the sensations belonging to earlier nows." Close quote. Similar to Kant, note Husserl's focus on the unity of the described experience. Without the retention of past phases, hearing the post horn would simply be a disconnected series of now points. Husserl's famous innovation was to conceive of the backward-reaching retentional frame as corresponding to a forward-facing process of protension, a mode that anticipates temporal objects as they are about to become. In this example, we can imagine as we hear the approaching horn that we would expect it to continue until the postilion's breath is released and the sound of the horn naturally decays. We would react with some measure of surprise, perhaps even dread, if the post horn were to be abruptly cut off mid-blast. Our surprise would be due to the fact that alongside the retentions of the post horn's past phases with our current perceptions, we would be protending the sound's continuance past the actually present now. In other words, the cutting off of the horn would disrupt the unity of our experience. This unity of time consciousness, as described by Husserl's tripartite retention, primal impression, protension model, is also demonstrated by Lewin. In the Phenomenology essay, Lewin constructs a P model, by which he intends to formalize our perceptions of the relationships between musical events. Such relationships and their temporal imbrication are a point of focus for Lewin, as is shown by the following example. I imagine hearing the music in example A. At time point X, what sounds can be said to exist for me as a listener? I certainly hear the dominant seventh chord of beat 3, but Lewin, following Husserl's protensional line of thinking, suggests that the downbeat tonic chord also exists for me at time point X, at least indirectly. My perception of the dominant carries with it a protended resolution in a coming tonic. When that tonic is reached, I then retain not only the dominant seventh, but also my then protension of the tonic and its subsequent fulfillment in my now present perception. Lewin calls this process the recursive aspects of musical perception structure. For simplicity, I prefer recursive unity. Similar to cutting off the post-horn's call, the unity of this experience can be likewise disrupted. Consider the music at Lewin's example B. The deceptive motion pictured here results from my protending a C major chord and the A minor harmony's subsequent disruption of that protended experience. Now, leaving Lewin's examples and extending the point further, imagine the music at example C. Here a disruption occurs outside the bounds of traditional tonal schemata, an F-sharp minor triad which has no discernible relationship to my tonally protended C major. Here we return to the applicability of multistable perception. For, given my present disorientation, it seems likely that I would attempt to anchor my ear to an F-sharp minor tonic. If the next few chords continued to suggest the new key, I might again be able to begin building a unified tonal experience. But what if the following chords again reverted to C major? I would likely switch back to my original tonal interpretation, thus multistably perceiving a passage of polytonal music. I shall attempt to capture this process in a new analytical technology, drawing on both Lewin's P model and Husserl's time diagrams. I call this tool the P-net, and I first apply it to an early example of systematic polytonality, the first interlude from Charles Ives's Organ Variations on America. In this example, Ives juxtaposes the eponymous tune against itself in a bitonal canon of F and D-flat major. We need only listen to the first few bars to gain a sense of this sound world. Lewin defines his P model with the following formula. Like Lewin, I assign each new event a perception number, but in the P-net I arrange them so as to visually align. Lewin's CXT, a musical context in which the perception occurs, has been subsumed by situating the P-net in Husserl's time diagram. As new percepts register in the present, past percepts sink into Husserl's contextualizing horizon and are held in retention against new information. Lewin's ST list, a list of statements or arguments characterizing each percept, is presented in each box of the P-net. For example, at P1 I hear an F major triad accompanied by a lone D flat in the bass. The statement list reflects my current perception. I hear the F chord as tonic in the key of F major, and I interpret the bass D flat as a chromatic upper neighbor to scale degree 5. This interpretation of the D flat includes an expectation for its resolution, so the subscript PT indicates this as a protended statement. Finally, Lewin's PR list, a list of pairs specifying relationships between various percepts, is rendered in the P-net by carrying over statements into successive P boxes. For example, the protended bass upper neighbor statement of P1 is carried through the remainder of percepts in measure 1 to be eventually problematized at the downbeat P4. The ways in which percepts relate to each other can thus be explored by tracking the progress of statements through the P-net. As variable tonal interpretations come into contact with one another, this process models a multistable hearing of the passage. At P1A, two other protensions are added to the bass upper neighbor. First, the repeated F chord on beat 2 leads me to expect a statement of the America theme. Second, incorporating my pre-existing knowledge of the quotation, I anticipate scale degrees 2/4 to continue the themes outlining sixths. At P2 I am rewarded by that very figure. 2/4 as a sixth, carrying the quotation forward. The RT subscripts indicate the retention of my protended quote hearing, uniting these statements to their protentive counterparts in P1A. We've already discussed the continued protension of the bass upper neighbor through P2, but another protension is simultaneously added. The PT subscript marked with an asterisk indicates that my hearing of the quote, though preliminarily rewarded, continues to be more strongly protended. Specifically, I now expect scale degrees 7/5 constituting dominant arrival at the coming downbeat of measure 2. This protension breaks the parallel sixth pattern, but takes into account the resolution of the dissonant upper neighbor in the bass. Up to this point, I have been conscious of a unified tonal experience, shown by the umbrella label U. At the present moment, as discussed in Lewin's example above, the protended P3 can be argued to exist for me as a listener. P3 fulfills and retains all of my protended statements to this point, protends the next stage of the quote, a passing tone up to the supertonic, and rounds out the preliminary unity of my experience with America in F major. However, P3 never materializes in the heard music. Instead, it is passed over for P4, and a disruption occurs that frustrates F as the controlling tonic. Here, earlier F major statements are thrown into question, and the D-flat triad causes new D-flat major statements to be posited. For example, the resolution of the bass D-flat to C, which I had protended and now retain, is complicated by the new suggestion of a competing D-flat tonic. Is the C now a dissonant lower neighbor, which requires resolution back up to D-flat? After the disruption of P4, the repeated D-flat major triad at 4A suggests confirmation of the new key. Note the reconstruction of context in the lower boxes of the diagram. At P4A, my intimation of D-flat major as controlling tonic is based upon my contextualizing retention of only the music reaching back a single beat. However, at P5 the reverse occurs. An F major triad again suggests the original key, and the context in which I understand that key must again retain all of the F major music from the beginning of the passage. These two chords in quick succession have engendered a multistable process, in this case bistable, since two keys are competing for tonic status and consciousness, with each center alternating and rebuilding its own present context. At P6 and 7, Ives presents more polychords, disrupting the bistable experience, after which the whole process begins again. To close my introduction of the P-net and to further demonstrate its use in describing multistable experiences, I shall simplify its presentation and expand its purview with a lightning round of other musical examples, each of which would benefit from much deeper exploration. In the following examples, I claim that polytonality represents a wide spectrum of compositional techniques and can be usefully invoked for understanding a variety of musical procedures. In the following excerpt from Mio's Saudades do Brasil, the composer juxtaposes linear expressions of F and F-sharp minor. However, the initial bar of the right hand can be realistically heard either as a rising 5-6-7 line tending upward in F-sharp, or as an F natural minor 6-7-1 line resisting downward pull. It is only at the downbeat of measure 4, with its confirming F-sharp tonic, that a bistable process is initiated between the semitone relationship. More or less polytonal effects may arise from tonally idiomatic contrapuntal procedures. In the following passage from the slow movement of the Italian concerto, Bach settles into a descending sequence of elaborated 7/6 suspensions in D minor. Before fulfilling a protended resolution of A to G over the first inversion G minor harmony of measure 10, Bach digresses with a scalar passage in the right hand, the chromatic upper tetrachord of D minor. The result is an ambiguous moment that flips back and forth between suggestions of D and G centers. Britton's arrangement of the Ash Grove features a passage in which a shadowy upper line suggests the key of the minor subdominant. I perceive the play of a nascent D-flat minor tonic alternating against the prevailing A-flat major throughout the phrase. At measure 54, however, the two centers dovetail on D-flat harmony. In the case of the competing tonic, I retain this as a protended resolution. In the case of the global tonic, I protend it as a predominant chord in preparation for the upcoming cadence.
Still trembles the moonbeam on streamlet and fountain, but what are the beauties of nature to me?
Finally, Prokofiev's Sarcasms contains a passage I might perceive tristably, with three tonal centers competing for priority in my consciousness, and switching at regular two-bar hypermetric intervals. First, I hear the repeated lower third of an F-sharp minor triad. At measure 3, the simultaneous lower third of a D-flat major chord complicates my hearing, and I adjust my perception accordingly. But at measure 5, I must again revise my interpretation, since the supposed lower third of D-flat major is retained instead as the upper third of a B-flat minor triad. Just as I have decided that B-flat minor is the determining key of the phrase, an E-sharp leading tone in the right hand again calls my attention to the original F-sharp minor area, and the process begins again. These examples have endeavored to capture the blurry, ephemeral experience of grappling with polytonal music according to a multistable model. By formalizing the stages of recursive unity, disruption, and multistability that shape my perceptions, the PNet attempts to crystallize some of the slipperiest events of time consciousness. Indeed, as a music analytical tool, the PNet might be usefully employed in any phenomenological inquiry that seeks to investigate such a network of temporal relationships. Phenomenological analysis of this kind can help us to slow down, reflect, and come closer to understanding the complex ways in which music and consciousness relate as they flow together through time.